Brendan, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be back.
Good to see you. For the audience, you were on episode 231.
Yeah, it was 2019, I think.
Yeah, it was May 19th, 2019 when that came out. So now this is episode 534. So I think a few things have happened since we talked.
Yeah, a couple things.
Just
a couple mild changes.
Let's refresh. Let's do state of the state. Tell us about, for those that don't know you, tell us, where you're at, what you consider yourself, where you're at geographically, as well. Just lay it out for us. What's going on right now?
I'm a mix and mastering engineer. I do Atmos and I produce every once in a while. I'm located in Jupiter, Florida, in a place called The Farm. So I'm out in ranch territory out here.
Formerly a resident of Davis, California, yeah. And before that, a resident of Brazil.
Yes, Sao Paulo.
Let's start with where we left off, because where we left off, you were in Davis. I believe you were still teaching at American River College.
That is correct.
And ultimately, you and the family picked up, left California, moved to Jupiter, Florida. You built this studio. Let's pick up from there. In a nutshell, what drove you to move to Jupiter, Florida?
Family. My wife's Brazilian. My kids are Brazilian. And grandma are heavily active in my kids' lives and in our lives too. And during the pandemic, we didn't see them for almost 3 years. So, we just wanted to be closer to our family in Brazil. That was ultimately why we moved here. And also, it's close to, it's sort of between everything. Nashville, not so much LA, but LA and South America, where I do a lot of work. And also, it's just a place we love a lot more, that place where we got our home. Once we saw this, we went, this is what we want with our lives. We chose it for, our kids could have a good school and a great place to grow up in.
Building the studio, relocating all that's kind of a chore.
It was a little more than a chore. It was quite an undertaking. During this period, my career just completely changed. It was almost like it did a 180 turn out of nowhere. From one day to the next, everything just sort of went haywire in a good way, but not expected, I'm definitely not in a place I ever envisioned myself being with my career path in 2019 when we last spoke.
Well, let's talk about, first off, relocating the studio. Tell us about the building of that first, because that's like your home base of where you operate from. So in order to facilitate this career, talk a little bit about the building of the studio.
So we bought out in a place called Jupiter Farms, which is a community outside of, it's about 12 miles. Actually, we're exactly 12.7 miles from the beach. But it is farmland, and we got almost an acre and a half here. And when I moved out here, I got a place where I could build a pole barn. So I put up a 35 by 40 foot pole barn.
What's a pole barn?
It's just poles and you strap steel to it. So it's essentially a steel barn.
With a cement foundation.
Yes, correct, with a cement foundation. I then, with my uncle, we did design for an apartment and my studio space. So I essentially designed the studio space, the bathrooms and everything with him, just the raw studio space, just the walls. And then I had used my John Brandt designs for my studio from my last studio, basically applied here, but in a much different way. So I did the acoustics far beforehand and just planned everything before I got here, which semi-worked, yes and no. So the build, when we moved to the house, it was, there were some aspects of the house that were quite dilapidated that we didn't expect. Like the people had sort of made the bathrooms look like they were useful. And the showers were leaking. The bathtub was completely rusted through. There was mold under the wooden floor. So the house was an adventure on itself. And then with the studio on top of it, I built everything in the studio by myself. Every single one of the diffusers and absorbers. I put all the drywall up myself, everything, which took quite a bit of time. I was going to have less time to do it, but after we had a problem with permitting, I ended up actually building my studio in my master bedroom to do the biggest record I had had in my career up until that point, because I got news from the county that it would take 4 to 5 months to get my plans approved again. So it pushed everything back. And I had Bruce Dickinson showing up in, I think it was 3 or 4 months. And so instead of concentrating on the build, I took all the panels that I was going to build for this studio, built them in my neighbor's farmhouse, and then we installed them in my master bedroom in my house. And that's where I did the record.
And so for the uninitiated, Bruce Dickinson, of course, is the lead singer of the band Iron Maiden, if you didn't know that, which is, I know for Brendan and I know for myself, pretty monumental band in our lives.
Yes, it's my favorite band.
Yeah. Hugely influential in my decision to start out as a drummer. So it's that's a pretty significant development.
Yes.
So you're waiting on permits to come through for the main thing that will ultimately become your studio. In the meantime, you're doing work on, is it for Bruce's record or was it for Iron Maiden?
It was for Bruce's solo record. I moved here first before my family, and I had set up in my master bedroom initially, and my wife and I used the guest bedroom, but it was not going to be anything permanent. And the initial setup sort of looked like something out of Mad Max, I knew no one would ever see it, and I just went and bought a bunch of acoustic paneling from Home Depot and strapped it on the ceiling and the walls haphazardly, tested it to make sure I could work there, did a bunch of mixing in there, and then started to build the barn and do everything with that. So I was working out of my master bedroom for quite a bit of time, and it actually worked quite well. I did a lot of really great records in there. Living wise, it was sort of it was very inconvenient. I was doing a lot of Atmos work in there, and I vibrated the cups out of the closets, the cupboards, and broke glass. And, my family would be watching a movie, heavily annoyed about listening to a kick drum for an hour. But, here we are 3 years later, and things have dramatically improved, I think.
Yeah. Since then, the studio got built. You moved out of the house with the studio. You've worked with Bruce. You've worked on a bunch of different things because you ultimately ended up joining the team at Million Dollar Snare, right?
Yeah, that happened while I was still in California. That's where the big word comes in that changed everything in my career, which is Atmos. In 2020, I believe it was, I sat down with my wife and said, I've got this opportunity to do some projects that I think will pay for an entire Atmos system. Can we purchase this? I phoned up my friends at Focal and bought a 7.1.4 system, spoke with my friends at SPL and got the MC16 console, and I started my Atmos adventure. During that period, I saw this guy named Nicholas de Purcell on Instagram, and he lived pretty close to me, and he started to do some really big records, and I listened to his stuff, and it was really good. So I'd comment on his stuff, and eventually I just reached out, or he reached out to me on Instagram, and we started talking. And one day I drove up there just to meet him and see his studio and say hello. And I commented that I was doing Atmos. And he said, oh, we should try to do this together. We should master in Atmos, which is essentially mixing stems and, making it sound like the mastered stereo file. So I believe our first project together was LMA, which is produced by DJ Mustard. It was mixed by Manny Marroquin and Jason Joshua. And then the project started flowing in. Money Long, Mount Westmore, which is Snoop Dogg and Ice Cube and a bunch of other people. And we just got sort of the who's who of hip hop from then until now we've been doing. I mean, we just did Kendrick and a bunch of other stuff. So that started what's been a 4-year run with Million Dollar Snare as their senior Atmos guy. And Nick's an amazing guy to work with. It's good to work with someone who's at the top of their game because it really it really makes you work harder and examine your craft a little more. And he's got a much different perspective on things than I do. And as coming from someone, already got jaded with the industry and sort of quit it once and then came back, looking at Nick do everything he does at the highest level, it really puts, some gas in my tank. It's been a blessing. And he's a extremely, extremely critical person on like even the minute stuff. So it's made me a much better engineer working with him.
That's great. I had the chance to meet him at a Grammy event here in the Bay Area. We chatted briefly, but I'm sure we'll chat again at length. Hopefully you and I will get him on this show. I gotta say, man, it's just really amazing how there you were in Davis, you were teaching. I remember when you got into Atmos, we were both kind of getting in at a similar time. You were really moving fast. You really were of great comfort in that. You talked me off the ledge a bit because I was like, here I am drilling holes in the ceiling. And I was like, Brendan, I can't get this right because my ceilings are so, screwy. And you were like, dude, just take some twine, take it from the tweeters, equidistant to the listening position, and that's it. And I was like, oh, well, of course.
I have a trait, which is what I call my manual trait, is that if I'm ever going to invest in something, I'm the type of guy who will go and read the manual and will spend hours online studying every aspect of it and trying to figure out how I'm going to install it, which piece of equipment, what I need. And so I essentially figured out what I needed to do before the system even arrived. I'd gone through all the troubleshooting. I did run into extreme amount of problems, but at least I had some resources already set aside to confront those so I could get up and running as quickly as possible and make Atmos something that was lucrative and ultimately career changing.
Not only did you get up and get yourself up and running and really helped jumpstart me getting running, but then you moved to Florida, just kind of, it was a little unexpected, but the rate at which your life changed with Bruce, Million Dollar Snare, which led to, of course, recently Kendrick, that's just so like shocking how fast that happened.
It was, I feel like right now, this is the first time in 4 years that I've really been able to sit down and look back on my life, because at the point in 2019, my plan was to exit the industry essentially, eventually, and just get a full-time at a college. So much so that I had dedicated myself to American River College, and I had gone, I had returned to college. I got accepted to Berklee College of Music, where I started to do my master's degree in music business. And this was to give me an advanced degree, which in academia is necessary. Doesn't matter how many shiny records and, little gold record players you have. In academia, you need to have the advanced education to really be seen as useful in the departments. So I started that, and then the stuff with Nick and Million Dollar Snare started to really pick up. I started working with Demetrius, who's one of the mastering engineers there too, a lot more, him doing QC on my stuff, and I saw massive pickup in the mixing of that. And then I mixed a record for this guy named Graham Bonnet, and Graham used to sing in Rainbow and Alcatraz, and I did it with a very good friend of mine named Conrado Pessinato, who's an amazing Brazilian guitarist and a very good friend. And it was his best-selling album. And you don't think about these things, but, when Bruce was a kid, he was a Rainbow fan.
Mm-hmm.
So when him and the producer, Roy Z, heard the record, this is my version of the story. I don't know if it's exactly the truth, but it's what I've sort of found out over the long run, is they went, wow, this sounds really good. We should have Brendan mix the next record. And that's where Bruce Dickinson appeared from Graham Bonnet. And I started Bruce Dickinson 2 years ago. I wasn't completely closed on the record, and Roy told me that he would be in LA doing some vocals. So I just bought a plane ticket and flew out to LA and dropped by the studio. I was supposed to be there for 30 minutes. I ended up spending almost 4 hours talking with him. And he's like, "Great, I'll see you in Florida in, I think it was April." And then one April day, I opened my door and there he was. And we spent the next 2 weeks mixing his record. And since then, I have done a lot more work. It's almost been a full-time job with him since the release of that record. So the stuff I can talk about is like I just redid Balls to Picasso, one of his 1990s albums. We added more guitars, added orchestras, percussion, all sorts of things, and remixed it. And I've also remixed in Atmos Skunkworks, one of his old albums, which is awesome because I got to talk to Jack Endino, who did Nirvana. He did Nirvana's Bleach album. And on Balls to Picasso, I got to work with Shea Baby, who did The Scorpions, White Snake, just all these awesome older producers. So it was beyond like an experience of mixing records I grew up listening to. I got to work with these badass producers, and they were happy that I was doing it, which was incredible.
I'll put a link in the show notes to Jack Endino's interview that I did. Jack's great. Really, really outstanding individual.
Super nice guy, was incredibly helpful. It was a really good experience. I phoned every producer that I could that was involved with the records, with the exception of one who's no longer with us. But man, this last year was a whirlwind of doing a lot of really good records and stuff with Million Dollar Snare and Bruce and all the other bands I work with in South America and Japan and everywhere.
Do you think it's uncommon to have somebody like yourself who's split between really the heavy metal world and hip hop? Like, not exactly in the same camp.
Well, you got to think I lived in Brazil. I owned a large scale facility in Brazil for 10 years. So samba, MPB, all the Brazilian rock and pop that I did there. And I still do. I still do a lot of Brazilian folk music and forró, axé, baião, samba. Like I still have a huge market in Brazil of stuff like that I do. Then I mix death metal records, and Bruce and really Nick opened the door for me in the United States to do all the hip hop. But hip hop for me was normal. It's something I listened to, but my assistant engineer from my old studio, who eventually became an engineer for a short period of time, over the last decade, he has become one of the largest hip hop producers in Brazil, and he feeds me all his work to master. So, I'm getting from all these different sources, and in fact, a lot of the assistant engineers and people that worked with me at my studio in Brazil are still people that work with me today and send me work.
Is there anything in yourself that you feel shifts when you're working with stuff from Brazil versus US hip hop versus metal?
There's a shift when I'm working for Million Dollar Snare. And that was the big learning curve for me, was really learning how Nick makes records and his perspective of records. I had to change my setup. I had to change my approach, the way I listen to things. It's been years of conversations with him to understand what he likes to do on records and understand sort of what his expectations are. So there's definitely a different approach when I'm doing the Atmos for Million Dollar Snare. Mm-hmm. For everything else, I guess I just do what I normally do. I don't think I really think about it. Like I don't put on my folk hat or my samba hat or my, Brazilians love 80s rock. So it's just sort of, I think, today I woke up, I did some Atmos for a British heavy metal band. Mm-hmm. I did some work on a Brazilian funk band. And I did some work on a Brazilian sort of alternative pop band. And then I did some Bruce Dickinson stuff today, just some assets, delivery, and some vinyl stuff. So it's sort of all across the board the entire time. And it definitely makes the day interesting.
I think that's great. The brilliance of that is just the difference in the music keeps things fresh, keeps you from becoming irrelevant, because you're getting so skilled in all these different areas.
I love doing it, and I love the diversity in it. I mean, I have some friends who are incredibly niche, like only mix death metal or only mix pop music, and they do amazing stuff, but I don't think I could niche down after doing what I've done all these years. I really like working on different stuff and being challenged the entire time. It makes life a little more interesting.
Now, you did get your master's because I saw your post the other day. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Berklee was an amazing experience. I mean, I've been in this industry for almost, I think, 30 years now. So I was sort of wondering what type of professor, if I'd ever outmatch my professors, because I'd already been a college professor, and every time the professors would just kick my butt. They just have the highest echelon of teachers I've ever experienced in college. And I learned a lot of stuff, met a lot of great people like Taku Hirano, who plays with Fleetwood Mac, and he's an amazing percussion player, and all these great connections of people that I'm doing masters for, or I have a lot of my clients releasing music for licensing through one of the Berklee graduates that I met. And I did something for the first time in my life. I got all A's. I actually graduated with distinction. It was hard doing the last cumulative experience, or the dissertation, or whatever you want to call it. Was 4 months of a lot of work. But after it was done, and I'm pretty proud of myself for doing it, and I'm a lot more knowledgeable for doing it. And now I've given myself my sort of bailout, as I really know when I'm in my 50s that I'm going to return to teaching audio in college.
Well, how far away is that?
I'm thinking in a little less than 10 years. I'm 47 right now, so I'm going to give myself some time. It has a lot to do with, how old my kids will be. But I really, really liked teaching, and I want to place myself in an environment where I'm going to enjoy it, and I work with colleagues that are happy that I'm there. That's my mission.
It's a good long-term play, too, to get the master's degree now and pile up the experience so that when that day comes and you make that decision, you'll have quite a resume.
I mean, the initial plan with that was to be a college professor at this moment, and I really had no expectations, even moving to Jupiter, that my career would turn into what it is today. Honestly, I get off the phone and I have conversations with people that I've listened to for 20 years, and I'm working on their records because, the bigger bands are a very small circle of people, and they all seem to know each other. So you end up having mutual friends and having great conversations, and I hang up the phone and go, wow, this is not what I expected. This is a lot of fun. But there's a lot of responsibility that comes along with it too. And maybe in 10 years down the line, I'm going to be satisfied to have made it as far as I never thought I would make it this far. So in 10 years, I think I'm going to be pretty satisfied, and I can, wander off and get a job and spend more time with my wife after all these years of working.
Yeah. The teaching thing, there's something obviously in you that really draws you to that.
I just enjoy doing it. One thing I hold true is that I was a decent engineer when I moved back from Brazil, and I began teaching at college. And I realized that I didn't have the in-depth understanding of audio. I had my understanding. And in-depth means you can explain it to everyone and anyone. And what teaching made me do is think of different ways to think about audio, and how to explain it to people, and how to simplify all the tools and procedures and policies. And of course, this psychological aspect. When I was as a college professor, I'd have my students do a lot of things with like group members and teaching them how to work in a studio with people you don't like or different situations. And it really made me analyze what I've done over the years. And I can look back and go, God, I should have done that better. So ultimately, I think it made me a better audio engineer and a much better professional business-wise and attitude-wise. I'm a much happier person now when I go into the studio. And I think I don't ruminate as much about details. I'm far more relaxed about and confident about what I know and I don't know.
Oh, I would agree. The teaching thing, my best analogy for that is that, like, if somebody says, let's say you're in a big city, do you know how to get to this point, to this point? And it may be a route you take every day, but when you stop and think, well, wait, how do I get there? Do I take a left? Do I take a right? Do I go straight here? How do I do that? In audio, it's so much the same way. It's like, oh, of course I know how to, record a vocal into Pro Tools. Well, wait a minute. How do I do that? Let me break it down into pieces, little tiny pieces, little chunks to explain to a person who doesn't do it all the time, show them exactly how it's done.
Well, it also enabled me to create sort of a omni perspective for the students, I call it. So taking words, teaching them specific vocabulary. Like all my students will always look, when I see them again, like at NAMM, they always yell amplitude and time at me because that's how audio is constructed. Then I had the 7 seed words. So I'd make them explain stuff and I'd tell them, look, every sentence in audio can start with one of the pillar words, amplitude or time or both. And then you can utilize these other words. So it gives them a vocabulary. And the idea with the seed words is that they're going to sprout into other vocabulary. And that's really, if you can explain yourself, that's when you begin to really understand audio. But the other thing that comes out of teaching too, that I really thought about this one day, and it was really this year, is Demetrius, who's a mastering engineer at Million Dollar Snare. He got his first #1 hit and, first platinum record and I was more happy for him. It was a really cool moment than I was for myself for all the ones that I've gotten. It was just really cool to see someone's career sort of not that it just started there, but he got his first, home run. And it's something that I see in my students too. I met a lot of my students at NAMM and it makes me really happy to see other people succeed. Not because of me, because I taught them, but of something we did together. We learned a lot of stuff together, and you see them applying everything that you attempted to teach them and being successful at it. I have no way to explain it. It's just something that I enjoy seeing almost or more than my own success some of the time.
Yeah, it is. It's quite rewarding when you see the results of your efforts in teaching and how that impacts somebody. I wanted to ask you, with regards to if we look at like just the simple trajectory of how Bruce came into your life via Graham Bonnet, working on that, do you feel that the records that you get, the records that you're working on, do they come as a result of piggybacking off some other thing, or does it come like almost via word of mouth? Or are you actively trying to get those things?
I think it's a combination of first and foremost your network, because I left someone out of the Bruce Dickinson story that I should have not. I have a business partner of 10 years that lives in Anaheim named Adasi, and we've made too many records to even count together over the last decade after I moved back. And he has always thrown my name everywhere he can. And so when Roy Z came to his studio, he was my promotional vehicle. That's what started the ball rolling. It's, I think, also what got me the Graham Bonnet. And then if you deliver or over deliver after that, that marketing has been done for you, it's a no brainer for the client. It's someone they like and respect, said great stuff about you, and then you deliver great stuff. I guess for the client, it's something they want to continue to do. With Graham, we're already working on a new record, and with Bruce, it just worked out really, really well. We really like each other. We talk to each other all the time, and we've made now plenty of records together, and it's just a relationship that works because I guess he liked what I did, and I'm organized, and I'm not a jerk. All those things that I think help, but where do they come from? I think it's initially your network, and the people that will say amazing things about you in a room where you're not in. Those are very precious. Like, those are people you hold on to. And then, of course, delivering a really good product, which is a must. So that's like the secret formula to go forward in the world.
You know, when we find key people in our life, and it could be everybody from the person who cuts your hair to your mechanic, to your mastering engineer, whatever chore, whatever task it is, once you bond with that person, once you identify that person solves a problem for me and I like dealing with them, and therefore I'm going to stay connected to them and we're going to work a lot together. It's the trick is to learn how to over deliver and learn how to be the asset, the problem solver.
Yeah, I think my close group of friends, which are mixers and mastering engineers and producers and live sound engineers, and I formed this group of people that are actually happy for my success, and they can share their success with me. And phone up and go, "Oh my God, I got this gig." My friend phoned up the other day and he got this amazing gig that no one knows about yet, and he knows, he can share this excitement with me. As I get older, I think I like having that network because it's the people who actually give a shit.
Mm-hmm.
In an industry of a lot of people who pretend to. So I like to keep my network small and close knit because it helps me socially and it helps me professionally. Some of these people are some of my best friends, and they're also people I work with, and they open doors like Alberto Vaz, who opened the door to Sheryl Crow for me, Stanley Suarez, who's Sepultura and De La Tierra and all these bands I've worked with him, and just Devon Townsend. I got to work with Devon Townsend because of Stanley, and all my friends that open doors and do it happily, and then we get to work together, and we go out and hang out and have lunch and do other stuff. It's the best of both worlds.
The subtext of all this, I think that I want the audience to be thinking about is that I know that in this day and age, we're a very social media driven society and a lot of stuff takes place online, but those personal connections, those tangible connections are so important because those are the connections that really lead to things like the things that have happened to you.
I think the Grammys is a good way to explain it. I went to the Grammys and I went there with very low expectations about my participation in the event. I wasn't shocked at how it happened, but that's not what I was there. When all said was said and done, and I left, I didn't go to the after parties and do anything. I phoned up a couple of really good friends of mine that were from out of town, working on some of the shows at the Grammys, and we went and had dinner together. That was that was my after celebration, is actually getting together with friends that, are going to be happy for me, as opposed to some giant networking party, and just enjoying this aspect of my career for the night with, again, people who actually give a shit.
And I have brought it up on this show before, and I don't know if you've seen this video. It's a round table of actors talking. I think Adam Driver is there. Robert De Niro in particular is speaking, and he talks about the successes, and he talks about how when you get success, just maintain your cool. Don't get too in your head. Don't drink your own Kool-Aid. Don't get high in your own supply, so to speak, about, yes, me. Don't do that. Because the very next day you could very easily, become, I don't know, persona non grata to somebody if you get too big for your britches.
One of my favorite analogies for this was said by Vance Powell, and he said, I got my Grammy, and then like a minute later I was out and back watching dog shit off my porch.
Yeah,
and that's how I feel about these events and awards I get from music. Is, for me, they're great. They are recognition for all the hard work everybody's done. I would never devalue them. Professionally, they're great. Personally, they're vacant. It's not something I'm going to concentrate much on. So much so that the reason we moved out here, which is not the mecca of anything other than golf, is the fact that I can't ruminate about the industry here. I walk outside and I've got a pond. We had an alligator in it like a month ago, which was pretty cool. There's armadillos, there's eagles, there's hawks, there's deer, there's even bear.
Snakes.
I see bobcats at night. We got little motorbikes that my kids and I can ride around, and life is just a little more relaxed. And I live out, in a quiet, nice place. So the studio turns off when I leave.
It's maintaining that perspective of, the success and the celebrations are great, but it's staying on top of keeping your nose to the grindstone and you just keep working, because you'll have time at the end of your life to look back and go, wow, I did some cool shit.
I think a lot of people see the accolades as something that will really it's going to change your career overnight. It doesn't always work that way. And the things that most changed my career are in areas that I least expected it, like Grand Bonnet. That Grand Bonnet record just changed my life, my career and my life. It was amazing to work on. And he's an amazing singer and a really great human being. So, you sort of get these bonuses, and those are the things I value more when I think of sort of awards in my career. There's specific records that I know have been the stepping stones for me. And those I hold a lot of pride in those records and a lot of great memories. I put a lot more value on that than I do anything the industry is going to reward me outside of it.
Well, let's talk specifically with regards to Bruce. Now, I know you're a big Iron Maiden fan, as am I. So how do you wrestle with that? Here you are, you're a fan. Then the guy shows up at your door.
The thing is, I don't. A couple months ago, he sang to me on the phone. And I just had this surreal moment. Like, this is crazy. And I told him, wow, this is crazy. 13-year-old Brendan would be shitting his pants. And he sort of laughs. And it's not something I want to, ultimately I figured out the following, that I'm the reason he does this. I'm the fan screaming to, last time I went and saw Iron Maiden, I couldn't talk for 4 days. So why hide that? And that's the energy he gets from his fans. So, I'm not fanboying on him in the sessions, but when something pops up, I will say how much I love it, or the aspects I disliked, or what I think of a certain era, and we have great conversations about that. So I don't avoid how happy his music makes me.
Yeah. It is surreal though, when you do connect with people that, I haven't had the opportunity to connect with many, but in particular, I can say, there was an album by Ozzy Osbourne called Speak of the Devil, which Brad Gillis from Night Ranger played guitar on. It was a live album. And then to connect with him, because he reached out to me on LinkedIn, and then I was like, well, son of a bitch, that's Brad Gillis from Night Ranger.
Yeah.
Who I really admired on the Speak of the Devil thing, and had seen Night Ranger too, and they put on a great show. And I'll never forget, I just reached out and said, hey, you want to go have coffee? So he meets me at Starbucks. We have coffee, and then the next thing I know, I get invited to his house, and he's showing me all his guitars, and you'd see all the Night Ranger and Ozzy plaques on the wall. And it's just such a weird thing. You think, this is so weird right now. I'm in this person's house that I looked up to as a kid. And, I've done little audio projects for him here and there, nothing major, but it's bizarre. You look back and you think 12-year-old me would just be crapping my pants right now. But
it's cool. A thing I also look at. I was doing a session with him in LA, and I asked him before the session, I said, hey, on the last day at the end of the day, could I bring some friends over? And he's like, yeah, no problem. And so my friends drove from Davis, California, all the way to LA. And the first person to show up was the guy who essentially got me into Iron Maiden, which my friend Jimmy's older brother, who saw their first US tour and everything. And I'm used to the environment, and I've done this for so long that, the professional me has to take over and just do my job. I don't get that moment. I can't, because that's how you lose your job. You have to stick to your guns and work and be a professional. And we were just about to press play, and the assistant said, hey, there's a guy here. And I said, oh, tell him to come in. It was Ian. And Ian walked in, and Bruce just said hello really quickly and sat down. And I went, Ian, sit down. And he sat down at the console, and I said, press the play button. And Ian looked at me like, am I going to blow something up? And he pressed the play button and it started to play the track. And he just had this, like, you could tell his mind had left his body. And he just sat there in this like zombie state for about 2 minutes, probably happy as hell, next to his favorite singer. I don't get to have those moments necessarily because the professional in me has to. But, you know, definitely I find myself every once in a while with Graham or Bruce sort of like having that, you know, I just want to get up and like tap my shoes together or something.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
It's cool. And I had that on our records, like working with Devon Townsend. That was awesome. Like being on the phone with Devon. I'm a huge Devon Townsend fan, and working on the record with him was brilliant.
I know I've talked to you like hundreds of times between now and the last interview, just you and I on the phone. But if you look back and look at that time period between the last episode and this episode, is there any business things that have really come into full view for you that you now understand better or know how to navigate better or could, you know, just feel more comfortable with?
I think it was the lesson of giving myself the value I deserve.
Mm-hmm.
Having audio essentially at the beginning before the Atmos and the investment, everything came through, is having audio is sort of like the grocery money. And my biggest concentration being a college professor sort of took away some of my bravado, I would guess, you know, some of that attitude I had in the room. And over the last couple of years, and it made me charge lower prices. And I don't think stand up as much for myself just because I don't know if it was disbelief of where I was going, but it was also just not seeing myself as valuable as the other people that were around me. And I stopped being awe-inspired in that financial way and starting to charge what my colleagues were charging and learning to, you know, I did this this morning. This client phoned and I went, oh, it's going to cost this much, you know, that sort of thing, because I don't want to lose the client. But then again, I don't want to work for cheap. And when the response of the client was, oh, phew, I thought it was going to be much more expensive. You know, I'm happy that I got the amount of money, but it's a lesson I'm learning is how much is Brendan Duffey worth to other people? And it's a really hard lesson to learn. That's the biggest business catch for me. And is, you know, just listening to podcasts like the Six Figure Creative, listening to your podcast once a week, just to get, not to agree or disagree, but to get varying perspectives and of course ideas.
Mm-hmm.
We've always got to be moving forward. And there's a great expression in Portuguese that I apply to my life is "Quem não arrisca não petisca," which means he who doesn't risk doesn't eat or doesn't snack. And my wife and I are very much like that. When we want our life to improve or want to change, we'll do something dramatic and risky. We've analyzed it, but I think it's what, you know, makes things interesting. And it also makes you more intelligent because you have to learn how to adapt to a new environment, a new direction, a new place. Mm-hmm. That sort of, for me, is like the spice of life.
Great note to end on. Brendan Duffey Audio is the website. Link will be in the show notes, of course. So cool, man. Just, you know, I mean, as I mentioned, you know, you and I have talked hundreds of times between the last interview and now, but, you know, just to kind of have a little bit of a debrief moment here to talk about it all is really nice. And I'm so happy for you, for your success. Every time the phone rings and I see it's you and I answer it and you're like, Matt, guess what? This is happening. It's just like, I get a little rush. Like, awesome.
Well, I think this has to be said, and it can be another end note, is I'm always awe-inspired by the fact that you do this. And I think for the community of audio, I can't imagine, I don't see another podcast that brings, maybe Liz Shaw. I'll put Liz in there too.
We gotta give Liz some love.
That brings so much value to engineers and lets everybody share a little piece of their life with others. And what you do is just so beneficial to our industry, is you bring value and perspective to it, which is a rarity. I think it's a really great place to connect. It's a awesome networking tool, and it also just allows you to see how many great people are in our industry.
Oh, I know. And it's great too. I feel that, thank you for all that, by the way, but your 2 episodes are a great example of, look where you were at in 2019, and here we are in 2025, and look where you're at now. And if you took those 2 episodes, just the bookends of those episodes, just everything that's happened between those 2, because there's quite the story of the whole Brazil, moving back home from Brazil and the shit getting lost and all the stories you told. And where we're at now talking about this, it's pretty remarkable. And I'm really, really excited and happy for you. And I think it should give others a little bit of like, hey, I could do that too.
Good piece of advice.
All right, man. Well, great to see you. Thanks so much for coming back and
Thanks
sharing.
for having me.
And obviously, here's to more continued success with you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, man. Take care.